two economies. Last year, one grew at 9.2%, the other at 8.7%. On any league table of growth, they sit next to each other, close enough that the gap between them looks like rounding. They are not next to each other. One of them is building something, the other is being paid something, and the payment can stop. And here is the part that should bother you. From the growth figure alone, there is no way to tell which is which. The number that gets reported is the number that cannot answer the question. The two countries are Ethiopia and Guinea, and the test that separates them is what this episode is about. This is the RISE Index, where we follow where economic power actually moves, and try to be precise about it. This season has been one question asked 8 ways. This is the 7th. Last time we watched a country that started the 20th century among the richest on earth and spent 100 years going the other way. Argentina's inheritance was wealth. What it never built was a machine that produced wealth rather than receiving it. So we ended on a question. If the old ladder is shorter and the old inheritance is worth less, where is growth actually happening now? The answer, in the raw numbers, points to one continent. 5 African economies are forecast to grow at 7% or more this year, according to the International Monetary Fund's April 2026 outlook. Ethiopia at 9.2, Guinea at 8.7, Uganda at 7.5, Rwanda at 7.2, Benin above 7. Those are forecasts, not results, and we will come back to what that distinction costs. But before any of it means anything, there is a piece of arithmetic that almost nobody does out loud, and it deflates about half of what you have just heard. A percentage is a ratio. It needs a starting number, and the starting number is doing most of the work. Take a country where income per person is around $1,000 a year. Grow it by 9%. Each person gains about $90. Now take a wealthy economy at $50,000 per person. Grow it by 2%, a figure that would be reported as sluggish. Each person gains $1,000. The 2% economy added 11 times more per person than the 9% economy. Growth rates measure speed. They do not measure distance, and the distance is enormous. This is not an argument that fast growth does not matter. It matters enormously. Compounded over 30 years, 9% transforms a country and 2% does not. It is an argument that the headline number, on its own, tells you almost nothing about how anyone lives. And the second problem with the league table is the word Africa. 54 countries. Different resources, different institutions, different colonial histories, different currencies, different results. Ethiopia and Guinea appear beside each other on the growth table and share almost nothing else. Senegal is instructive here. It is routinely named as an African growth story, and it does not appear in the top rankings for 2026 at all. The names people repeat and the names in the data have come apart. So if the growth rate cannot separate these economies, something else has to. And the thing that does it turns out to be a question this channel has been circling since episode 1. Not how fast. Growth in exchange for what? Guinea first, because it is the cleaner case, and because it contains a trap that has caught richer countries than Guinea, including one we spent a whole file on. Guinea is forecast to grow at 8.7% this year, and the driver is mining. The country holds some of the world's largest bauxite reserves. Bauxite is the ore that becomes aluminium. Now ask the only question that matters. When the mine expands and the growth figure rises, what decided that? Global demand for aluminium, Chinese construction, freight rates. The price set on exchanges in London and Shanghai by people who have never been to Guinea and are not thinking about it. The growth is real. The money arrives. But the country is not the author of it. It is the recipient of a decision made elsewhere, and the same mechanism that delivers 8% in a good year delivers a contraction in a bad one, with nothing changed inside the country at all. We have seen this exact shape before, one episode ago. Argentina had grain, cattle, and some of the best farmland on earth, and it grew handsomely whenever the world wanted what it had. What it never did was convert that windfall into a machine that would keep producing when the price fell. That is not a prediction about Guinea. Botswana built diamonds into one of the better development records on the continent, and Norway turned oil into a sovereign fund that outlived the oil. Resources do not doom a country. What resources do is make it easier to pay the bills without building anything. A country with a mine can fund a budget, import what it needs, and postpone the hard work indefinitely. A country without one cannot. And postponement is not a decision anybody makes. It is what happens by default, one reasonable budget at a time when the money is already arriving. Think about what building a manufacturing base actually requires of a government. 20 years of investment before the returns show up. Training people whose skills will not pay off within an electoral cycle. Protecting infant industries that will be inefficient and expensive while they learn, and being blamed for that inefficiency in the meantime. Now offer that same government a mine that will fund the entire budget starting next year, with none of the waiting and none of the blame. The interesting question is not why so many countries take the mine. It is what it takes to refuse, and one country on this continent has an answer we will come to. The economists have a name for the harder version of this. When resource earnings pull capital, talent, and attention away from manufacturing, the mine can crowd out the factory. Resource-poor economies are the standard examples of countries that had no choice but to build. Korea, Japan, Taiwan. So there it is. Growth you are lent, against growth you owe. Hold that distinction, because we are about to watch a country try very hard to be on the second side of it. Ethiopia, 9.2%, and the drivers are completely different. Public investment, infrastructure, services, and a deliberate industrial program. The centerpiece is a network of industrial parks. The best documented is at Hawassa, built to attract foreign garment manufacturers into serviced factory space, with the state supplying the power, the roads, and the customs regime. If that sounds familiar, it should. 2 files ago, we took apart South Korea's machine. The state picked export sectors, the banks fed them capital, and firms that missed their export numbers lost access to it. Same shape as what is being attempted at Hawassa, minus one part we will come to. And it produced real things. Real factories, real export earnings, real wages arriving in households that had none. Then the numbers. The park at Hawassa was projected to create up to 60,000 jobs. As of August 2024, it employed around 22,000. That is roughly a third of the target, and the gap is not a scandal. It is the ordinary distance between an industrial plan and an industrial result, and every country that has industrialized has that gap somewhere in its history. But the largest single blow to that park was not delivered by anything inside it. Not by the factories which were built, not by the workers who were trained, not by the strategy which was working. It arrived from 4,000 miles away, written in the language of legal eligibility rather than industry, and we will get to the exact date in a moment. Which is the reversal this episode turns on. The industrial strategy was never the variable. Somebody else's paperwork was. The wages are harder, and this is the part of the industrial story that nobody puts on the brochure. Stay with it, because the uncomfortable version is also the one that explains why the model has serious defenders. A study of the sector concluded that garment workers needed at least 4,130 birr a month to cover basic living costs. It found that the overwhelming majority earned less than that. That study is from 2019, and Ethiopian inflation since has been severe, so treat the specific figures as historical rather than current. But the structural point survives the date. The competitive advantage being sold to foreign buyers was low labor cost. That is what the model runs on, and it is what the workers experience. Picture one of them. A woman in her early 20s who was moved from a farming district to Hawassa because there is a wage here and there was none there. She works a sewing line. She sends money home. She is, in the language of development economics, a data point in a structural transformation. She is also the first person in her family to earn a wage that arrives on a fixed day of the month. Both of those descriptions are accurate, and the second one is why the model has defenders even among people who find the wages indefensible. That is the honest tension in every industrialization story this channel has covered. The Korean factories of the 1970s paid badly by any modern standard. The question was never whether the work was hard. It was whether the country was climbing while the work was being done. So far, this is a difficult but recognizable industrial story. Ambitious plan, partial delivery, hard wages, real progress. And then, on the 1st of January 2022, something happened that had nothing to do with any of it. On that date, Ethiopia lost its eligibility under the African Growth and Opportunity Act. AGOA is United States legislation that grants qualifying African countries duty-free access to the American market. The clothes coming out of Hawassa had been going to American buyers under that arrangement. Without it, they carried tariffs, and the arithmetic that had brought those buyers to Ethiopia stopped working. PVH, one of the largest apparel companies in the world, left. Reporting at the time put the job losses at more than 11,000 people. Consider what actually failed there. Not the factories which were built, not the workers who were trained, not the strategy which was working. A decision taken in another country's legislature removed the market, and the machine had nowhere to send its output. This is where the comparison with Korea stops being flattering and starts being useful. Korea ran the same play in a very particular window. It had access to the American market during the Cold War on terms that were, in practice, close to unconditional. The United States wanted a prosperous, stable Korea for reasons that had nothing to do with textiles. Ethiopia is running the same play with market access granted by a statute that a foreign legislature can review, condition, and withdraw. And did. Which is the reversal stated exactly. Ethiopia owned the factories, owned the workforce, and owned the strategy. What it did not own was the door those goods went through, and a door you do not own can be closed while you are still loading the truck. That is the season's argument arriving in a new form. In episode 1, it was a choke point in semiconductors. In episode 5, it was a state that could take capital back from failing firms. Here it is a paragraph in someone else's trade law. Every growth machine has a part that sits outside the country running it, and that part is where the risk lives. The recovery is genuine, and it should be said. Manufacturers in the state managed industrial parks reported around $267 million in export earnings in the 2025-26 fiscal year, more than double the previous year. The machine was damaged. It was not destroyed. There is a third pattern on this continent, and it is the one with no historical precedent at all. No country has ever completed it, which is exactly why the next 4 minutes are the most speculative in this episode, and we are going to be honest about where the evidence stops. Kenya's information and communications sector has, by World Bank measurement, grown at around 23% a year over the past decade, ending up roughly 6 times its size at the start. The most visible piece is mobile money. Over 80% of Kenyan adults use some form of it, and the mobile money networks contributed up to 8.6% of Kenyan GDP in 2023, around $24 billion, comparable to the entire manufacturing sector. Read that comparison carefully, because it is the interesting part. A financial service built on mobile phones is contributing on the same order as everything the country manufactures. And this is the answer to the question left open earlier. What does it take for a country to refuse the easy money and build something instead? Kenya's answer is unglamorous. It had no mind to refuse. Kenya has no bauxite windfall, no oil boom, nothing large enough to fund a state on its own, which meant the only route to a growing economy ran through building a capability that people would pay for. The absence of a shortcut is doing real work in that story. Rwanda is attempting something similar from a much smaller base, competing directly with Kenya for the same regional role in technology services on the back of sustained political commitment rather than any natural endowment. Neither of them planned this as a development model. There was no ministry that chose to skip the factory stage. It is what happened when a country with no resource income and a young population found something it could sell. Which raises a possibility that every development model of the last 70 years says should not work. What if a country does not need the factory stage at all? The honest answer is that nobody knows, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. Here is what the evidence supports. Manufacturing value added has stayed under 13% of the continent's GDP since 2020, and in most African countries it has been falling since 1990. Economists call this premature deindustrialization, manufacturing shrinking at income levels far below where rich countries began shrinking. And here is where the honesty has to go further, because that finding is contested. Most of those studies measure manufacturing as a share of GDP. Recent work argues that the share can fall while manufacturing output per person rises if other sectors grow faster, which means the relative measure and the absolute measure can tell opposite stories about the same country. So the truthful summary is uncomfortable and short. Some African economies are growing on services at income levels where history says they should be growing on factories. Whether that is a shortcut or a dead end has not happened yet. 3 figures, and then the test. The first. Under 13%, that is, manufacturing share of the continent's output, flat since 2020. Whatever is growing, in most places it is not factories. The second. 15 million. That is the number of jobs that must be created each year across sub-Saharan economies to absorb the people arriving in the workforce. Actual creation runs well below that, and much of it is poorly paid. The third. 600 million. That is the projected addition to the working age population by 2050, as the continent goes from around 1.5 billion people to roughly 2.5 billion. By then, on current projections, 1 in 3 people on Earth aged 15 to 34 will be African. Put those together and the question sharpens. Growth of 9% is not the achievement. Growth that generates 15 million jobs a year is the achievement, and those are not the same number. So the test this episode has been building. When an economy grows, ask what the growth was in exchange for. Growth on a price you do not set is lent to you and can be recalled without notice. Growth on market access you do not control is also lent. One paragraph in American law demonstrated that. Growth on a capability you built is owned. A workforce that knows how to do something. A firm that can win an order on merit. Nobody can withdraw those. By that test, the countries on this continent are not one story. Guinea is being paid. Ethiopia is building, with the roof of its market held up by someone else's hand. Kenya is attempting a route the textbooks do not contain. and every one of them is doing it against a clock that the demographic projections have already set. 7 files. A choke point in semiconductors. A country assembling other people's exports. A rich world that stopped making things and found the factories came back without the jobs. A billion people industrializing into an age of robots. A machine that worked and sent the bill to the kitchen table. An inheritance spent. And a continent that has to be read one country at a time. Every one of those was the same question wearing different clothes. Which means there is one thing left to do, and it is the hardest. Put all 7 on the same map and see what it says. Where the choke points are now. Which capabilities are moving and which are stuck. What the next 20 years actually look like when you stop reading them one country at a time. And then the part most forecasts leave out. What would have to be true for that map to be wrong? This is the Rise Index. Subscribe and follow where power moves next.